Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Great to have you with us. Busy show on tap. It is Jake Fromm joining us later on. Always a fun conversation. Connor Riley stops by. A lot to get to with him. SEC spring meetings beginning in Destin, Florida. There is big news already coming out of that event. Yesterday, Greg Sankey firing back a lot of critics of himself and the SEC. We will let you hear that here on today's show. Diamond Dogs know their path towards a return to the College World Series. We'll talk to you about that. And to kick things off, big compliment coming to Kirby Smart by way of CBS Sports. This is one of those things that we think matters, and it stands in sharp contrast to some of the other stuff we've heard about Georgia as of late. Great place to begin here today. Glad you enjoyed a holiday weekend. Glad to have you back with us as our work week gets cranked up here. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
It's two great guests today. It's Connor Riley, Jake Fromm here in a little bit, also in about 5 minutes' time. We have I think, big problem looming in college football. And to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what we do about it, but I think it's about to smack us all in the face, and we have new evidence today of just how real all of this is. And in this particular case, it's got nothing to do with transfer portal, nothing to do with NIL, the topics we oftentimes address in these sort of calamitous tones. We'll give this to you here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Ahead of that, though, can we do something just for fun for a moment? Because one of the things that I do want to talk about this week is the growing skepticism that exists around Georgia. We are in talking season. People are going to talk. And as we've said, it seems like some of the opinions we're getting from sort of the national media types, I don't know, it seems to be just getting worse, that we're kind of in a barren wasteland of really sharp college football analysis, I would say. Oftentimes, Georgia's on the receiving end of some of this. But as I told you one of the days last week, it may have been Friday, they run together, that as we get closer to the start of the season and kind of get out of some of this wilderness of the sort of talking season time of year, eventually a lot of this stuff will get better. Now, before it does, we're going to laugh at some of it. And trust me, you're going to hear plenty of this from us in the days ahead of just how hard some are trying to work to have you believe that it's all just sort of falling apart for Georgia. The wheels are coming off, the walls are closing in, and the Georgia success is all kind of in the rearview mirror in the past tense. We are going to laugh at some of this because of the sheer, amount of it that exists out there. It's kind of gotten a little bit ridiculous. So we're going to have some fun with that eventually. But as we've also kind of foreshadowed, at a certain point, a lot of that's going to come to an end. And when it comes time for the coaches poll to come out, and when it comes time for the AP poll to come out, when it comes time for all of those things to be there, that Georgia's actually going to be right there where they sort of need to be, as one of the top 4 or top 5 teams in America, with among the best chances of actually winning a national championship, no matter what may be said about them in the months like this, when we're kind of deep into summer and everybody's sort of just trying to throw hot takes out there to sort of see what gains some traction. Now, how come I have so much confidence about that? Well, part of the reason is because I've been around the block a couple of times. The second reason I have all that much confidence is also related to something else we've discussed in the past too, which is Georgia has something going for it that nobody else has. Georgia has the best coach in college football. And in this sport, you still want that. That the best coach in college football just provides more leverage for success than the best sort of anything else, including the best overall player. If you had your choice, you'd want the best coach. In professional sports, that might not be true. In college football, coaching still really matters. So when you have someone who's arguably the best coach, that's a really good thing for your program. But when you have someone who is viewed as the consensus best coach, or perhaps even the unanimous agreement this is the best coach in college football. Well, of course, at that point in time, you've got the kind of valuable asset that almost every other program is going to be envious of. And for Georgia with Kirby Smart right now, that is the case. We gave you this from ESPN the other day. CBS Sports is also, I would say, the most famous for ranking coaches. It seems like to me they've done it longer and put more effort into their rankings. And so they've recently re-released for 2025 their ranking of top coaches. We are not surprised to see Kirby Smart at the top. But what CBS says about Kirby Smart is really interesting. Let me read this to you. I like the phrasing on this. Tom Fornelli, I believe, is the writer here, saying, "The king stays the king." And it's kind of funny, Kirby Smart, Georgia fans kind of call him the Kang sometimes, as far as his, perch at the top of college football. CBS acknowledging that too. "The king stays the king," CBS writes. "Kirby Smart was a unanimous choice at number one among our panel, which should come as no surprise. Yes, the Bulldogs have failed to win a national title the last 2 years, but when a season that includes an SEC championship is seen as something of a letdown, it says a lot about the program that's been built in Athens. Also, who knows what would have happened if Carson Beck hadn't been injured in the SEC championship game last year." Now, all of that is really important, and a lot of this is sort of foreshadowing some of where we're going to go over the course of the next few days. That when you have the unanimous agreed upon best coach in college football, you are probably fairly well set up to deal with whatever challenges come your way in a year like 2025. And we are going to notice and perhaps have a little bit of a chuckle at those, as the CBS writer alludes to there, who use the fact that somehow Georgia simply didn't win the national championship as some form of condemnation, or the fact that Georgia dared lose a game to Notre Dame, which Georgia fans themselves were really bothered by. Georgia doesn't expect to lose that. But after all those dominant non-conference wins, Georgia dared lose one of them, and all of a sudden now people who were never convinced by all the wins have now allowed themselves to be convinced by the, to the opposite, to the negative, based on a single loss. Now, that alone should tell you that the fix is in, when no matter how much sort of positive data you can stack, doesn't seem to be proof of anything, but one loss is somehow proof of everything. That sort of lets you know what's going on there. But the point is, to sort of sum up this part of the conversation, if you're a UGA fan having a hard time what to make of some of the skepticism that exists around Georgia, including, by the way, from some of your fellow Georgia fans, just keep this in mind. CBS Sports says there is an unquestioned king of college football coaches. That is Kirby Smart. And we would say that's a pretty good thing to sort of build your confidence on as we get closer to the 2025 season beginning. Now, with that said, let me shift gears to something completely different for a moment. The SEC spring meetings have started in Destin, Florida. We're going to have live coverage from DawgNation all week long of all that comes out. That actually began yesterday, though, with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey meeting with reporters for what I believe is like 45 minutes. Now, I'm going to encourage you, and this is going to seem self-serving, but I really do think this is in your best interest. You should go to our DawgNation YouTube page, and you should watch this full press conference from Sankey. I know that Sankey's got a little bit of a dry delivery sometimes, and so Sankey has a way of making interesting things sound boring by the way that he talks. But y'all, there is a lot here about the future of college football, the future of the college football playoff in particular, that is worth your time. And Sankey, to the extent that he's going to, I think got pretty animated yesterday on a number of topics. Now, here's the big issue. It seems like almost certainly the college football playoff is going to expand to 16 teams. And my belief is when that happens, something that has made college football very special will be lost, perhaps forever. Let me start with the college football playoff expansion part of this, because the most controversial aspect of this is if the expansion does occur, the SEC and the Big Ten behind the scenes are allegedly demanding 4 automatic qualifiers. at the expense of the lesser power conference leagues right now, the ACC and the Big Ten, which may get stuck with only two. There are critics out there who say that's unfair. Greg Sankey fired back at those critics yesterday. This is what he said.
So if you actually go back and do the research, that kind of format could cost us positions, depending on the number of teams. I don't see the critics actually digging in to understand that reality. I don't see the critics actually analyzing, like I've just described, how schedules are evaluated. So the critics can run to the microphones and share their opinions. We're trying to find a format to determine whatever number it is, the best teams in college football. And I think where we are right now is we have used a political process inside a room to come to decisions about football. We should be using football information to come to football decisions. Have to be unanimous. We provide a model and then we sit on our hands for a year and a half, 2 years, as opposed to looking at the depth of issues I'm describing about the game and the concerns about regular season scheduling being impacted by what we have right now.
So that's Greg Sankey there. And, of course, this is recorded in a room full of reporters, and you do hear just the banging on the keyboards. There's a part of me that doesn't 100% understand that because all of this is seemingly transcribed, and all of this is also being recorded for video and things like that. I'm not quite so sure why it is we still have so much typing on that, but there is going to be some of that here. But the information important enough that we feel like we need to play that. And so what you have going on here is a little bit of gamesmanship, where publicly Sankey is not committed on behalf of the SEC to any playoff format. But privately, it is believed they want the 16, and they, along with the Big Ten, want the 4 automatic qualifiers. Now, we think it's true that if the SEC is kind of only given 4 automatic qualifiers, that in a lot of years, the SEC would be shortchanging itself. We think that's right. That when Sankey says, hey, to those who say this is unfair, if we really fought for what was fair, we might get 6 teams in the college football playoff. Now, as a very pro-SEC guy, I would say, well, that's why I don't think that you should be out there kind of pushing for 4, the same number as the Big Ten. Like, to me, the Big Ten has just gotten over on the SEC so much. And by the way, we've been saying this now for a couple of years. Sankey himself, in a clip we won't play for you, but Sankey himself yesterday said that a lot of people privately behind the scenes in the SEC, meaning their athletic directors and perhaps university presidents, think the SEC has already given too much away. I think that's true too. And my response to Sankey would be, stop giving away so much then. Don't just use that as sort of a negotiating leverage ploy. Actually take that seriously. That the SEC has stood there while the Big Ten has stepped up and now counted itself as an equal to the SEC on the basis of like a couple of years' worth of success on the football field with national champions, nowhere near the overall depth of conference. Frankly, the Big Ten has essentially bought their way to the top of college football, and the SEC, to my eyes, has sort of stood there and watched it happen. I don't think, if you think about like all of this as kind of a game of Risk, you ever played the board game Risk? I don't think the SEC has played this particular game of Risk very well. I just don't. And I think now you have kind of another example of that where what Sankey says there I don't think is empty rhetoric, that the SEC is essentially fighting for the bare minimum of what it should get, 4 teams in a 16-team playoff, no matter what the critics might say about that. But all of this is sort of reflective of what I believe is going to become, I don't quite want to call it an unsolvable problem for college football, but it could become a very difficult problem to solve. Let me take another step to get there. Something that Greg Sankey also said yesterday that I think is unmistakably true, and he's absolutely right in saying is, while there's all this chatter about, should they go to a 14-team playoff? Should they go to a 16-team playoff? What do you do about that? The way in which the college football playoff has been selected, the way the teams get in, the obsession with the win-loss record all of this being kind of what I call quantitative analysis as opposed to qualitative analysis, where you're actually making decisions about Team A is just a better football team than Team B. We have railed on the College Football Playoff Selection Committee for that. They just don't either seem willing to or capable of acknowledging that it is not parity and balance in college football. There are some conferences and teams within those conferences that are just better than the rest of college football. Even if they have the same record, they just don't exist in the same orbit. And as Greg Sankey pointed out, the inability of the selection committee to do its job well, although Sankey did not say that, I'm saying that, the inability of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee to do its job well has now created a situation where nobody wants to play anybody anymore. That everybody now realizes that tough schedules are to your detriment. They're fun for us, but to the actual coaches and administrators who are running these programs, it almost seems foolish to play this kind of thing anymore. And while I have my issues with Sankey, he is 100% right about this. Take a listen, Greg Sankey, yesterday on the way in which regular season scheduling is being impacted by the misapplication of the college football playoff format. This is Sankey again from yesterday.
One of the things you learn is you're not going to divorce your regular season schedule from college football playoff selection. In fact, I think there's more of a feeling that regular season scheduling is governed by college football playoff selection. Witness the discontinuation of the series when this isn't critical of Troy, it's critical of the reality that, hey, you can drop a big series, it's not going to hurt you come selection time. You have a team that played 4 games against teams with 6-6 records last year that got in. Another team didn't play. Really anybody at the top of its conference was selected in. And it's clear that not losing becomes in many ways more important than beating the University of Georgia, which 2 of our teams were left out did. Nobody had that kind of quality win. So, and I think you can't just like run down a college football playoff selection idea without thinking about, well, if we play 8 or 9 games, what are the impacts? That's the depth of analysis we're looking at.
So once again, I think that's incredibly interesting from Greg Sankey, and I think he's 100% right. And what he's kind of making a veiled reference to is Nebraska recently canceled a home-and-home series with Tennessee for the stated reason of there's just no benefit to playing this because that's not what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee values. Now, why do I have such a problem with this, and why is the looming possibility, if not likelihood, of college football playoff expansion so problematic in the eyes of so many people? It's simply this reason. And if you've been kind of in and out, I want you to focus, if you can, with me for a couple of seconds, if you're able to. Here is the issue that we're going towards. That if you go to a 16-team playoff with 4 automatic qualifiers from the SEC, 4 automatic qualifiers from the Big Ten, okay, well, that may make it okay for SEC teams and Big Ten teams, mostly Big Ten because they're the ones that seem to be wanting to duck competition right now. That may make them feel okay about playing some of these non-conference games again. But the problem is the non-conference games, the results won't matter. The winner and loser will essentially be inconsequential. Do you understand why that is? Because if you've got 4 SEC teams that make the playoff, the way in which they make the playoff will be solely determined by the SEC within its own conference play. It'll be based on your record in conference. They may have the play-in games to go along with an SEC championship at the end of the season. But if Georgia were to play Notre Dame like it did in 2017 and 2019, or Clemson like it did last year, that would become just a glorified exhibition. There wouldn't be any real consequence to what happens in those games, that you could play it, lose it, shrug it off, and say, well, that's okay. Our chance to make the playoff is going to be determined by these 4 automatic qualifiers that we've got within our conference. That we are literally before our very eyes seeing the thing that has made college football so special, the fact that week to week our regular season matters more than any other. We are potentially seeing that change before our eyes, to the point that in the future, you might have a significant number of regular season games where the winner, the loser, fairly meaningless. The actual act of playing the game is just for television. Now, to the credit of one reporter, I don't know his name, but he did ask Sankey this yesterday. Okay, so the expanded playoff, the automatic qualifiers, maybe that preserves some of these non-conference games that teams will be less afraid to play them because they won't feel like losing them is going to knock them out of the playoff. But Sankey was asked, yet if we get to that point where games are played, where the loss doesn't hurt you and the win perhaps doesn't really help you, then don't you worry about these games being inconsequential? It's a really good question. Judge for yourself how good Greg Sankey's answer is.
I think the first point is, should we like to preserve the games? I think that's one of the problems we're encountering right now. And we've seen that. And I've heard that. And we even had discussions with our ADs who are thinking about, maybe I shouldn't play this game. Like, don't walk away at this point. So, Ralph, I think the first point exists now. I don't think you can say they're inconsequential. Again, I think one of the conversations last year when we went to 12 was we had a big game week 3. Well, it doesn't feel the same. So I would just caution about making the observation that won't have the same meaning or same impact. I think those games do have impact. They do have meaning.
Great.
Now, it may be different from an access point. And that's where I look at some of the weighting of the rhetoric right now that, well, I shouldn't play those games. I'm better off going 11-1, 12-0. I think that's a bigger threat to playing those games than some other model that might be considered.
I'm telling you, I think college football's got a looming problem here. On the one hand, Sankey's right. The fact that the College Football Playoff Selection Committee doesn't judge teams fairly. They only look at win-loss records. It is now making teams not want to play tough non-conference games anymore. But expanding the playoff to 16, giving these automatic bids, 4 of them to the SEC and the Big Ten, I think that actually makes things worse because all of a sudden now you're going to have a lot more teams playing games that have really no impact on their college football playoff standing. And the week-to-week value of college football's regular season, I think the chance of seeing significant erosion to that is a very real thing. This is not an easy problem to solve, but it's a problem nonetheless. And frankly, I don't think that Greg Sankey fully realizes how serious this is. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Glad to have you with us. No matter how you get to us, video 10 a.m. across all platforms, radio noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just really happy to have you as a part of the program today. So thankful as well to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible. You know, college football's got its issues to deal with. We understand that. Perhaps you have your issues to deal with as well, coming from, like, say, a fire that broke out in your home or your warehouse, your rental property, something like that, or water pipe busted, or weather-related catastrophe. We obviously have seen a lot of that in the news as of late. When these things occur, you're talking about very significant messes, huge cleanup jobs, more than you could obviously do yourself. And that's where the restoration specialists from ServPro come in on all of this. They can get your mess cleaned up, looking back its previous condition like it literally never even happened. That's what ServPro is all about. That's what their restoration specialists have been doing for a long time. Each and every ServPro franchise also independently owned and operated. So you're going to have somebody who's going to roll up their sleeves, get into the mess with you, get it cleaned up for you, working alongside the insurance company, kind of running point on your job, whether it's a small scale, large scale, everything else in between. That's what ServPro does. So I want you to find them online. It's servpro.com, SERV, servpro.com for a lot more on that today. All right, we got Jake Fromm here coming up in just a little bit. Looking forward to a fun conversation with him. We're also going to look at the other SEC coaches on that CBS list of top coaches. We'll get to that here in a little bit too. We've also got Connor Riley here coming up. I want to follow up with Connor on the stuff we were just saying. And I want to see if Connor agrees with me that it looks like we are heading for a future in college football where the games just start to matter less. And once you kind of go down that path, I don't know how you reverse course. It seems like this sport right now is in a very precarious place, not to even mention like the NIL and the transfer portal, the stuff we typically talk about. This alone feels like a pretty big issue. We'll find out what Connor thinks about that just in a moment. But prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today and talk about something good. Georgia got its news about its NCAA baseball tournament fate here this week. It'll begin play on Friday as the 7th seed nationally. That means it obviously will host an NCAA regional, and if it advances, it'll get a chance to host a super regional too, playing the winner of the Oxford regional, which could be a red-hot Ole Miss team, perhaps also in-state rival Georgia Tech. That's two of the teams playing there in Oxford. As far as the rest of the Georgia regional goes, though, you've got Binghamton, Oklahoma State, and Duke. Georgia's the 1 seed. Will play Binghamton coming up on Friday at noon. I guess the understanding is Georgia wanted the night slot. TV says, no, you got to play at noon. Some of y'all may know better than me. I didn't feel like this was a terrible draw for Georgia necessarily. I think the super regional matchup could be challenging, but if you get to a super regional, you sort of expect to have that. Now, I think that baseball is a tricky sport. You almost never know exactly what's going to happen. So anything could happen to Georgia this weekend, but I didn't hate this draw for Georgia, I don't think. Here's what I do expect, though. I'm expecting there to be an unbelievable atmosphere around Foley Field. I just think it's going to be incredible. Can't wait. I think I have this right. I believe there's an on-sale time for tickets this evening, 7 p.m., if you want to jump in and be a part of that. I know many of you will. There'll be people all surrounding the outside edges of Foley Field, too. This is just going to be a great old-school vibe, and I think it's going to be a ton of fun. So we're happy about this. It's one of our favorite sports events. Frankly, it's one of my favorite things of summer in recent years, this NCAA baseball tournament, hoping to see the Diamond Dogs with a long run through it. We'll make that around the doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. All right, we got Connor Riley coming up. That's going to be a lot of fun. Jake Fromm after that. Now, more on the Diamond Dogs' path back to Omaha, perhaps, and as well, exactly what Greg Sankey said yesterday, what I thought was a pretty volatile press conference. Let's cover all that and more here today with Connor Riley. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Glad to have you with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Connor Riley here. A lot to get to with him. Connor, let's do something fun for a minute, and then we'll get into what I thought was a pretty serious day involving SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey yesterday. I won't pretend to necessarily be an expert on these 3 teams. I thought the Georgia draw in the regional, to me, looked pretty good. I think the Oxford regional could create kind of an interesting super regional matchup for UGA. But as I said, you sort of expect that to be tough if you get that far. Anything can happen in baseball. Georgia saw that happen in 2019 when they failed to advance out of the regional they hosted. But I'm actually feeling pretty good about Georgia's draw, and frankly, I can't wait for the weekend. What did you think about all that?
Yeah, I think all things considered, especially when you look at some of the teams that were possibly out there, it is a regional that I think favors Georgia's play style. Now, that can work in one of 2 ways. I don't think any of these teams have particularly great pitching, and when you look at how dominant Georgia has been at home this year, especially with how they play, I think 133 home runs from the season lead the country in that statistic. I think that's going to help Georgia. And again, I'm super interested in seeing the tone and tenor on this team. If they're able to get through this regional where they have Duke, Oklahoma State, who's one of the last teams in the field, and then Binghamton, their conference champion. You like how this sets up. And if you're a Georgia fan or you're a baseball fan in general, yes, I know it's the Oxford regional. I think there's a lot of interest in seeing if maybe Georgia Tech can find a way to get out of that regional. It's an Ole Miss team that wasn't necessarily always great during the entirety of the season, made a big late push, and then obviously got to the SEC championship game in Hoover. But there's a world out there where it is a Georgia Tech super regional in Athens. And I think Georgia and Georgia Tech fans, for that matter as well, would be thrilled at the possibility of that. But to get to that point, you have to get through this first weekend. Georgia proved to be able to do that a year ago when it hosted a regional. But that hadn't always been the case prior to Wes Johnson's arrival in Athens. So I'm super interested if they can continue the momentum they had last year at Foley Field in the playoff or in the NCAA tournament and do that this time around.
Really interesting. We'll obviously be watching that as the week goes on. I want to shift gears to something that I think is pretty important. I thought it was a pretty volatile press conference from Greg Sankey yesterday to kind of kick off SEC spring meetings in Destin, Florida. And I think the issue at hand here that we've spent most of our time talking about today is just as significant for college football's future as figuring out the compensation model and how you kind of manage the transfer portal, all those hot button issues we typically address. Connor, I think the thing that has made college football such a special sport is the value of the regular season. Our week-to-week games just matter more than other sports do. That's the thing that's made college football special. But moving towards what seems like is certainly going to be the case, a 16-team playoff, we're just going to have a lot more games on the schedule that don't seem to matter as much. All the non-conference games. And I just don't think that either Greg Sankey doesn't get this or he does get it and he's pretending not to because he knows the networks want to pay for them. You're going to have a situation where if Georgia plays Clemson like they did to begin the 2024 season, the loser of the game is not hurt by the outcome at all because the SEC team is going to get a chance to be one of the 4 teams from its league that makes the playoff, and there'll still be, concessions for the ACC part of this as well. That you're going to run the risk of injured players don't even consider playing, teams perhaps even intentionally sandbag as a way of creating a better narrative for themselves later on. And the thing that has made college football great, the fact that losing hurts so bad, I think we're looking at a future where losing just doesn't hurt quite as bad anymore. And something that has made college football special will be lost, hopefully not forever, but perhaps so. Do you agree with that?
It's already lost, BA. When we moved as a sport to expand the college football playoff from 4 games to 12 games, I think that was a continued devaluation of the regular season there. And look, there's a world last year where Georgia loses that game to Georgia Tech, and then they turn around next week and they go win the SEC, and there's no real difference to their path there in that regard. Just happened to work out, which was to find a way to win in overtime, and then they go on to win the SEC in that regard. The expansion of the playoff from 4 to 12 teams has already, as we saw last year, so devalued the regular season in that regard. And quite frankly, if we're going to go to 16 teams, which is the way that it certainly looks, this might be controversial to some, but quite frankly, I'm in favor of auto bids. I'm in favor of the SEC getting 4 bids, and while that completely devalues the non-conference schedule there in that regard, I'm so tired of the subjectivity in this sport. I think you pointed this out earlier, and you can look back over the course of the last season. There are just people that have opinions on football and have national platforms that just frankly should not. They don't know what they're looking at. There was a tweet last night from Dan Wolken trying to compare the Indiana-Notre Dame game and the Georgia-Notre Dame game. And the fact that he has one of the larger media platforms in college football where he's allowed to influence people and thus talk to athletic directors, people who work on that college football playoff committee, shaped the way the sport is covered. I'm just so tired of the subjectivity with this stuff that we do not have a trusted group, and we'll quite frankly never have a trusted group. I've come around to the idea of the SEC. Yeah, you get your 4 auto bids. The top 2 teams automatically lock those up, and then you have 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5 for those last 2 spots. Because quite frankly, I know there's some talk of the 5-11-16 model where you have the 5 conference champions and then the 11 wildcard teams. If you can't finish in the top 6 of the SEC standings, you don't deserve to make the college football playoff in that regard. And I do think that will put a greater emphasis on SEC games. So while that's obviously not going to capture some of the magic that you see with these big-time non-conference games that have just become such an integral part of the sport, I do think that values and prioritizes SEC games in a way that can at least somewhat try and recapture some of what that sport for so long was. But with the expanded playoff and the all likelihood further expansion, it's just hard to see that coming back.
So let me try to lay this out in a way that is easy for people to follow, because I know you're probably this way with your writing. I feel like with these issues, it's very easy for all of this to sort of sound like noise. I'm going to try to keep this as linear of a conversation we possibly can have. There are a lot of people, and they're expressing themselves loudly right now, who don't think the SEC should be guaranteed more bids than, like, say, the ACC or the Big 12. They feel that way about the Big 10 too, but we're more interested in the SEC part of this. I think it's ludicrous to think that the ACC and the Big 12 would be on the same plane with the SEC or the Big 10 right now. I have no problem with the imbalance favoring the SEC and the Big 10. What I don't like, though, is calling them automatic qualifiers. I would still love to have the sort of qualitative analysis that should be possible where you look at an Ole Miss or a South Carolina or an Alabama, I would say playoff level teams from a year ago that were excluded, and say this team is just better than so-and-so. Or if those teams don't make the playoff, the kind of team that is beating those teams, that team is just better than whoever else. That's the issue that I have. Of course, I would say the SEC and now the Big Ten should have more playoff teams in their leagues. They are just, I would say, objectively speaking, better. But to call it automatic bids, I think gives something away that once it's gone, you just can't get it back.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. But I would point out a season ago, and look, maybe this is because Notre Dame and the way that people discuss them in general is just problematic. There were a lot of people saying, oh, because Notre Dame lost an earlier season game to Northern Illinois, they didn't deserve to be in the playoff. They were overranked, overhyped, et cetera, whatever you want to call them. And then they go out, they beat Georgia, they beat Penn State, they beat Indiana. Now, Indiana, in my mind, was not on the same caliber of those first two teams that I listed. But I think Notre Dame a season ago showed you the value in going out there and proving it. And to your case, maybe not having the automatic qualifier attached to it. But I would say as well, you're going to have people that have agendas in this regard. You're going to have people that, while there are pro-SEC people, there are also just as many, if not more, anti-SEC people. And with the SEC not winning a national title in the last 2 years, it seems like those people have only gotten more vocal when, just watch the games. The SEC has just been a better conference. You can look at recruiting rankings. You can look at the NFL draft prospects they have sent to the next level. Every year, year in, year out, the SEC is producing better football players and better teams. And that is just, unfortunately for some people, that has become too hard of a fact to accept. And so with that in mind, look, there are just going to be people that have an anti-SEC bias. Danny Canal has made it a cottage industry. And so while I understand, again, this idea of, the automatic qualifiers and that, say a season ago hurts a team like a South Carolina, like an Ole Miss, I think if you had that 4 automatic qualifiers where a year ago, okay, so you have Georgia and Texas in the SEC championship game, and then you've got, say, Tennessee playing South Carolina and Alabama playing Ole Miss, I think Tennessee would factor in that there as well. I think that to me is maybe a better formula where there will be some years where you have 5, maybe even 6 SEC teams worth getting in. I think that's why there's the discussion of the 2 different models there. But if you can't crack that top 6 in the SEC, you don't get a chance to play it out. Again, I just wonder how quality of a team you really are.
So let me kind of finish with this. This is the mistake that I think the SEC, or I should say college football, is making. This goes beyond just the SEC, although Greg Sankey, I think, is a part of this mistake. And we see this happen a lot in both sports and in life, other forms of entertainment. I think that right now, the powers that be in college football think they are not getting as much revenue as they deserve from their various TV contracts. It's been said before, and I think that this is directionally accurate, if not specifically true. College football is essentially twice as popular as the NBA in America, but the NBA has twice the TV revenue that college football has. And I think people kind of view that as a real opportunity. But the mistake I think the powers that be are going to make in this pursuit of significantly more revenue, I think they're trying to trade one fan base for another. And in life, that just never really works. This is what killed NASCAR at the, basically 20 years ago, and it was said on the record at the time when it was arguably also the second most popular sport in America, that if we can just get it out of the South, if we can just get it into more of the big cities, if we can just sort of trade this fan base for a different fan base, then we can make some real money. And obviously, it's far less popular now than it was when people were making all those grandiose claims. I think the same thing is true here, where as you try to expand, as you try to make a playoff that looks more like other professional sports, as you try to nationalize this to make it, more palatable to the Northeast and the Far West and places like that, as you try to trade one fan base for another as a way of maximizing the revenue more commensurate with other professional sports leagues, I just personally think it's doomed to fail because this sort of thing in entertainment, whether it be sports or not, this sort of thing in entertainment fails all the time. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that ESPN, Fox are chasing casual sports fans.
Yep.
And you see that with the way they go about doing things. I think that's why you see, the Fox in particular pushing the Big Ten noon game. Like that, to me, is such a slap in the face to true college football fans out there because, look, like, yes, there are some people out there that love a noon game and love that kickoff, but the best and biggest games in the sport are always played on Saturday night because that makes the in-stadium, the in-town environment all the greater. And, like, sure, you can try and chase those people and chase those casual fans and try and cook the books because they are doing that when it comes to TV revenue. And I think I would caution anyone reading too much into it. We had more people watching this than ever. No, you just have more people. You're able to better track how many people are watching it. And if you continue to pursue casual fans in that regard, you're going to end up turning off your diehard, your actual constituents. And that's a problem right now. Look, I'm online, I'm seeing discussion. There's never been, I think, more anger, and maybe that's just the world we live in this day, regardless of whether it comes to college football. There's never been more anger. There's never been more disappointment. There's never been more frustration, not from a specific aimed at a specific team, but I think the sport at large and the frustration with the way that things are going. And so I think moving forward, look, college football and the SEC and Greg Sankey's got to be real careful because I think the people that are super invested in this sport, they don't like the direction that it's going, and they pretty clearly don't feel heard right now. And if you continue to not hear them and to tune them out, they're going to leave. And to your NASCAR example, BA, they're ultimately not going to want to come back to a sport that looks nothing like what they grew up on and what they loved for so long.
I think it's a serious issue. I think you stated it well. I know we'll talk about it plenty in the months to come. Also look forward to reading plenty from you at DawgNation.com. Busy time here for college football as we roll through the summer. Thanks for being here, Connor. We'll talk to you again very soon on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
Yep, and as always, it's a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So let me just say this, and we're going to shift gears. I know people hear all these sort of very apocalyptic type conversations, and we're conditioned to, no matter what people say, eventually nothing ever really changes. I just feel like something is looming on the horizon. I really do. And I don't know if it's surprisingly good or if it really is trending to something unavoidably bad. I don't know. But y'all, we got a lot of change coming to the business of television the next couple of years. Very, very soon, ESPN is going to be offered as sort of a standalone a la carte product, for instance. The TV model is really altering. And I think there's a chance that college football kind of gets caught up in some of that. And I think if it makes a misstep, if it makes a wrong move, I just think the people that run college football right now need to be very, very careful. As someone who loves college football more than any other form of entertainment out there, it is my number one pastime. And as long as it exists, it always will be. The people who run college football right now need to be very careful. There are a lot of shifts taking place underneath the ground here. Be very careful about all of it. All right, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And let me also give a shout out here. Next year, right around this time, a little less than a year from now, DawgNation Cruise rolls in again. Can't wait to have you on board Utopia of the Seas with us for all of that. It's going to be an incredible experience. We want you to be a part of it. Back on Utopia of the Seas, another 4-night sailing, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. You love that. But how about also that chance to be a part of the brand new Royal Beach Club coming to Nassau in the Bahamas, completely changing the experience that you have, in a beach vacation like that, taking advantage of all the water slides and all the things to do on board Utopia of the Seas. You want good family fun, Utopia of the Seas provides that. You want to get a chance to enjoy all the various water activities, trust me, with stops at Perfect Day, Coco Cay, and what's coming to the Royal Beach Club, and obviously on board there, Utopia of the Seas. There is so much of that. It's going to be an amazing experience. Our Jessica Slater can tell you all about it. I want you to reach out to her today. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. It's a wonderful time to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, including our DawgNation cruise this time a year from now. All right, I want to shift gears to something else here just for a moment. before we get a great conversation with Jake Fromm. We started the show by talking about Kirby Smart as the top coach in college football, unanimously selected that way by the panel at CBS. I want to look at the other SEC coaches in this top 25 for a moment. And we kind of believe a little bit in like the wisdom of crowds around here. Not mob rule. Mobs are often wrong. Crowds can be correct. And I think the wisdom of crowds found in the CBS rankings does give us a little bit of a window into how this 2025 season might play out. For instance, a guy that comes into the top 25 is a guy that, because remember, there are 130-something Division I coaches. They're like 70 in the Power 5. So to be among the 25 best coaches, if it's a consensus viewpoint that you're there, there's some value in that. Eli Drinkwitz from Missouri comes in at number 24. Missouri kind of off the radar after getting a lot of hype last year. It wasn't a terrible year for Missouri. They still went 9-3. Their win total this year is 7.5. I kind of have my eye on, very quietly, Missouri being slightly better than expectations here this year. Bringing over Pribula from Penn State as the starting quarterback. They do lose Luther Burden. But at that sort of slot receiver position, that's something that Drinkwitz has gotten a lot of production from in the past. I think Missouri's a little quiet right now, perhaps maybe a little more dangerous than they're given credit for, although irrelevant for Georgia because they are not on Georgia's schedule. Number 16 coach on this list is Josh Heupel. We've said this plenty. Yes, it was a tumultuous offseason. Yes, Nico Iamaleava left Tennessee in kind of a dramatic set of circumstances. As much as Georgia fans don't want to hear this, I do think that Heupel probably is the kind of coach that can figure out something at the quarterback position. And in September for Georgia, that road game to Knoxville, I think still looms as an incredibly tough game. 12th on this list is Ole Miss's Lane Kiffin. I think this is a very interesting year for Kiffin because a year ago seemed like the year, like the old line that we sometimes use, if not now, when? It seems like that question was asked of Kiffin a year ago, and it appears the answer may be never, because after you spend that much money to come up a little bit short, lost to Kentucky, kept you out of the college football playoff, you may never get that back. But maybe Kiffin can prove people wrong this year. Then I'll quickly give you a couple of others. You got Kalen DeBoer coming in at number 9, Brian Kelly coming in at number 8, Steve Sarkisian coming in at number 4, obviously Kirby Smart is number 1. Of those three, DeBoer may be the most interesting because this is an Alabama team that's still thought to have like 5 of the top 100 players in college football, a win total very much the same as both Texas and Georgia. This is a guy who's actually played and coached for a national championship. Is Kalen DeBoer really among the best coaches in college football? If so, then there's a chance that Alabama's perhaps a little bit undervalued. For now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, we'll also get ready to shift to a Kroger Fresh Take as we say hello to Jake Fromm here, the great former quarterback of the Georgia Bulldogs. Always a thrill to have him as a part of our program, including here today. Jake, I trust that you and your family had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Obviously, I know you're just like me. A very important time to kind of pay tribute to those who paid the ultimate price for our country. It's also kind of a kickoff to the summer, so I hope that you and your family had a good time over the course of the last couple of days.
Yeah, absolutely, to pay tribute and say thank you for those that gave their lives for our country. And always good to be here with you on the show.
So we were talking about the CBS Sports list of top coaches. Kirby Smart, number 1, unanimously so. And Jake, the point that I made is over the course of this offseason, there are a lot of people who've brought up some, we would say, real and legitimate concerns for Georgia. Offensive line needs to play better. Running game needs to improve. It is a first-year, full-season starting quarterback. There's some issues related to that. The Georgia defense at times, last couple of years, hasn't quite been everything you've come to expect it to be during the Kirby Smart era. All of those things are at least to a degree real, even if at times they're sort of overstated by some of Georgia's critics. And, I think the most appropriate response to all that is if you do truly have the best coach in college football, a lot of national media types, I think correctly so, seem to think that's what Kirby Smart is, then I still trust that guy to sort of figure all of this out. These are tumultuous times in college football. Georgia's got its share of issues just like everybody else, but we've seen Kirby Smart sort of solve these types of things before. In other words, it seems like it's still a very good time to have the best coach in college football the way that CBS seems to think that he is.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This number one ranking, not that he cares about it at all. Knowing him, he absolutely doesn't. But it is well deserved, and he is, kind of earning these Saban-like comparisons, and a lot like the Alabama teams of the late 2000s and early 2010s. The teams that would lose so much talent to the NFL, and how are you going to be able to do it again next year? You're losing so much. And it's just year after year, they just regroup. New guys step up, recruit very well. And Kirby has done all those things throughout these past couple of years and this offseason as well. Now, I will say the caveat here is, to me, I don't see the parity in college football is probably at a very, very high level that it's been because of the dollar bill and being able to basically buy players and say, hey, come here. So now when you're recruiting the solid backups, these solid 3-4 star players, hey, they're going to go and play at maybe a smaller school, get paid, and then transfer to the big school. So the parity is there, but my concern is just not there.
No, I think that's a really fair point. Looking at the topic of coaches from the rest of the SEC, it seems like the last couple of years we've had a little more stability with coaches than we've kind of come to expect from the SEC. For instance, as long as Nick Saban's Alabama, you sort of knew what that was. We also had a series of years where it didn't seem like we had a lot of coaches necessarily getting fired, kind of bringing back a lot of the same guys in the league year over year. I get the sense, I don't necessarily wish this on anybody because it's, people's employment, but I get the sense that we're about to have a much more volatile year where, if I do the math in my head, I think I've said before, I think as many as 5 coaches could be different next year going into 2026. Even if that number is not, quite right, we're about to learn a lot about, can Kalen DeBoer keep Alabama at the same level that it kind of was when he inherited the job? Was last year Lane Kiffin's sort of best chance to get into the college football playoff? Even for guys like, say, Hugh Freeze, Billy Napier, you could go, Brian Kelly hasn't quite lived up to LSU expectations here thus far. It sort of seems like we've had a very calm period for SEC coaches, I think because people have been trying to figure out the NIL and the transfer portal and stuff like that. But now the landscape's starting to sort of take shape, and now it's, are you winning or not? And I think we could have far more coaching changes going into 2026 than we've sort of seen in the SEC the last couple of years. How likely do you believe that could be?
I think you make a very fair point there, Brandon. And, kind of as you were talking and kind of discussing this topic, my wheels got turned in. I'm kind of thinking, all right, why that might be? Well, with the NIL and more kind of money being sent to the players, maybe whoever is buying out these coaches' contracts doesn't quite want to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
That money has to come from somewhere. I'm not saying that's the reason. I could be completely wrong here. I'm just thinking, spitballing and talking out loud. But you're exactly right. There's a lot of talk about Napier last year. Coach Beamer seems to be having a good thing going on at South Carolina. There is. I definitely agree. There is some kind of stability that you see in the SEC, but right now, the expectations are very high, and the desire to win is at an all-time high, especially when you start equating it to dollar bills being spent on your respective teams. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head, and speaking prophetically, and watch out, there could be a lot of carnage going down this fall when it comes to head coaches.
Let me bring you into another topic we've been discussing, and that is what seems like a likely expansion in the college football playoff to 16 teams. And when that happens, it seems like there could be 4 automatic qualifiers for the SEC, the Big Ten, a pair each for the Big 12 and the ACC. The fear I have with this is, for a number of different reasons, it seems like we're running the risk of further devaluing the regular season. And I think the regular season has been what has made college football special. And I say that as someone who also has liked the college football playoff. But boy, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And this sort of feels like that. Jake, if we ever get to the point where our sport has something like the NBA's version of load management, or even, I love Major League Baseball, but honestly, if it's Memorial Day weekend, if I'm doing a cookout or something like that, I don't feel pressure to watch every pitch of every single game because there are 162 of them. If you get some of that creeping into college football, in my mind, something we love is lost, and it might be lost forever. Is that overstating the drama in your mind to say it that way?
No, not at all. I mean, you just are speaking what I'm feeling, kind of in my heart. That's kind of what we love about college football, and every week mattering so much to where you want to end up at the end of the season. You mentioned earlier in the show about Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, and you lost to Kentucky, you lost to Florida. I mean, those losses have to matter. And then when you kind of expand it, Ole Miss was right there on the cusp. But, I mean, when you start expanding it too much, exactly like you said, the regular season just doesn't matter quite as much. I think viewership will go down. Now, I think when you start talking about viewership and the TV deals, yeah, you'll make it up on the back end and having these playoff games. But I don't know. I don't love it. I love having to be your best week in and week out in the college football season. And to me, that's what made Alabama great. That's what makes Georgia great, of just being a consistent football team week in and week out and having to play your best no matter what.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. We always love to have conversations with Jake, and we love our friends at Kroger, too. I mentioned cookouts, things like that for Memorial Day. Obviously, as you kind of roll through the rest of the summer, so much of that as well. And to have more time for the things you love, more money on the stuff that you're already buying, back in your pocket when you're getting those burgers and dogs go on the grill or the drinks go in the cooler or everything else. Kroger and their membership model known as Kroger Boost gives you a great chance to do that. Check out Kroger.com/boost. You can try it for free for 30 days. Take advantage of free grocery delivery, free grocery pickup, and on the stuff that you're already buying at your local Kroger, you're used to getting dollar-for-dollar savings at the fuel pump, but as a Kroger Boost member, you get twice the savings. That's 2 points for every dollar you're spending there at your local Kroger. So check out more online. It's Kroger.com/boost today. That is Kroger.com/boost today. Jake, let me finish with this just briefly. We mentioned baseball a moment ago. So Georgia begins its run through the NCAA regional on Friday. And I know you're busy, you got a lot going on. I don't know how frequently you've been able to be at Foley Field, including it this year, but I will tell you, I love the NCAA baseball tournament. I think these regionals and super regionals are just really special. I think a big-time sporting event at a place like Foley Field where the confines are so, tight, you're so close to the action, and you got, all the people, up in the Kudzu Hill area. They've added some bleachers to kind of make it just I think, an incredible atmosphere for baseball. I'm really looking forward to it. Obviously, I hope that Georgia gets to Omaha in the College World Series, but I don't know if it's on your radar as much, but how much fun would it be to see this baseball team go on a run through an NCAA regional, a super regional they'd get to host? Could certainly be good times for the Diamond Dogs over the course of the next few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gearing up for a great tournament there at Foley Field. Some of my favorite memories from college, watching my roommate, Tony Losi, play in some playoff baseball. Playoff baseball is so much fun to watch. A lot like we were talking about with, the regular season in college football, and every week matters. Let me tell you, every pitch matters in college baseball, college playoff baseball. And man, it is just something about it. The tensions are a little bit higher. The stakes are obviously a lot higher, and it makes it so much fun as a fan, as a viewer, to watch. Hopefully, I can slip away and be able to watch a game or two. With my 14-month-old, he's keeping me pretty busy, but I'll do my best to get out there, because watching baseball at Foley Field is very, very fun to do.
Good stuff, Jake. We always appreciate your time and hope you and your family have a wonderful summer here. And we'll look forward to speaking to you very soon as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take as well.
Thank you, Brandon. See you next week.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm. Appreciate that. Of course, Jake, one of Georgia's own, understands what it's like here in our state, and our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are very much the same way. When it comes to your insurance needs, you have to have it legally. I mean, auto insurance, home insurance, these are the sorts of things you gotta have. And so making a good choice about the insurance provider you use, that's also a really important thing, too. And so that's what our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are all about. These are friendly people. They live in Georgia just like you do. They're going to work every day, taking their kids to school functions, and trying to enjoy summer around the lake and things like that. They're doing everything just the same way you are. And so it's good to do business with people who kind of see the world in a similar way, kind of share the same turf. Well, that's what our folks at Georgia Farm Bureau are all about. We say it all the time. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. So why don't you give them a call today? 877-404-1050. That's Excuse me, 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That website, once again, gfbinsurance.com. Reach out to them today and find out why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. And as we get ready to say goodbye to you here today, speaking of homegrown dogs, good news here for Jarvis Jones. You may have seen Jones, who's been a UGA staffer now for a good number of years, obviously a great former Dog, NFL career too with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but began his football journey at Carver High School in Columbus, Georgia, with the great Dell McGee as his coach. Of course, Coach McGee left to go to college football, now the head coach at Georgia State, and the opening came available at Carver High School in Columbus, Georgia. We're proud to let you know here via our Golden Shoe today, our friends at Score Atlanta providing the graphic, that Jarvis Jones has now been hired as the head coach of Carver Columbus High School. Favorite son returning home. That's always a great thing. One of the power programs here in the state of Georgia. Jarvis Jones, a guy, just a great dude. Part of our Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. Big part of the Georgia staff the last few years. Certainly wish him well as he begins his journey as a head coach with his hometown team, his alma mater, and one of the top programs in the state. Great news for Jarvis Jones there on that front. Brand new head coach of Carver Columbus. Lousy, stinking Gators, no good news for them. How about a Gator hater update? It's been 1,662 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator hater updater. Y'all have a great day. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. We're going to get your comments here today, find out what's on your mind as we kind of roll through. And I do hope you all had a great Memorial Day weekend. Let's see what else is going on here at YouTube here for a moment. Jackson 09 also mentioned the Ole Miss loss to Kentucky a year ago. It's the kind of significant regular season moments that can just sort of pop up out of nowhere. And listen, I don't want to be a hypocrite here. I have supported playoff expansion from 4 to 12. I thought 12 would be a good thing. I don't think I fully considered the extent to which the selection committee and the sources that inform them are just sort of incapable of having a college ball conversation. To sort of borrow a line made famous by somebody else, I'd take the first 12 names in the phone book on the committee more so than the people that are actually on the committee. You can't have less respect than I do for the college ball playoff selection committee. Tyrone Brown says, what are some qualifications to be on the committee? So here's where my sort of, at times, sort of conspiratorial bent comes shining through. We put all kinds of people on the college ball playoff selection committee. But the actual committee is the athletic directors. The, Condoleezza Rice or former coach, or we have a couple of sports writers who've been on, people with military backgrounds. We put all kinds of, distinguished names on the college football playoff selection committee. But those people don't have any more power to pick the the playoff teams. Those people don't have any more power to pick the playoff teams than you and I do. They are literally there for packing peanuts. They're just dressing around the actual infrastructure, which is the athletic directors. The athletic directors are the ones with the real power. And once again, to put it all out there, and people are always sort of fixated on, well, you got so-and-so from so-and-so school on the committee. He's going to favor his own school. To be completely honest with you, there are times in which I wish that was the case, that people actually, sort of cared about who wins and they would be in it for themselves. I wish there was more of that sometimes. What there actually is massive concern about simply who plays. The people in charge don't care who wins, they care who plays. Because the paycheck comes because of who plays. That's why in the clip we played for you earlier, to just go full-scale Senate here, that's why Greg Sankey says he's not concerned about the results of these non-conference games being devalued in this new world. Because in his mind, even if the result is watered down and the outcome is inconsequential, the check still clears. Ultimately, the people who are in charge don't care who wins. They care who plays, and they will manipulate the system to make sure the right teams are playing. And that is how it goes. Let us see what else. Paul Moon says putting Texas in a year before over us was so dumb. Wild mental gymnastics to put them in because we blew it against Bama in the SEC championship game. Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where I was a little disappointed in the fact that I thought the argument for Georgia was pretty strong in 2023. And I think there's some people around Georgia who thought the argument was pretty strong. But there were a lot of Georgia fans who just don't want to do it. And I'm just telling you, and I said this at the time, and it was proven true, like you can't just tap out because you lose a game. You can't do it. A lot of Georgia fans, after losing Alabama, they just wanted to tap out and not, argue for playoff inclusion. And I do think that was a mistake. Y-Room giving some compliments to Connor Riley. I thought that Connor was really good. And my issue with Greg Sankey oftentimes comes down to this. Compared to the Big Ten, and we said this before, the Big Ten oftentimes gives off the vibe that it's just not that into college athletics. That, the favorite son, head coach Jim Harbaugh, kind of their equivalent of what Kirby Smart would be down here. The moment he had a chance to return to the NFL, boom, he did. It is widely believed, at least viewed as a strong possibility, that if Ryan Day ever had a chance to go be an NFL head coach, he'd like to do that. We don't know if that's true. We have reason to believe it might be. Someone like Matt Rule is only in college football because he got fired from the NFL. The guy who completely, lit the gas can on all of the chaos of the last couple of years, Kevin Warren, the former commissioner, the moment he had a chance to leave his role as Big Ten commissioner to go be president of the Chicago Bears, left just like that. There's a lot of reason to believe that the Big Ten is just into something other than college athletics. Whereas I think the SEC, by comparison, is a little more into this thing. The coaches are sort of lifers. One way or another, Greg Sankey sort of feels like a little bit of a college athletics lifer. These are people that have dedicated themselves professionally to college athletics. Therefore, it would stand to reason to me they would be a little bit more in favor of what is the best for college athletics overall. But I don't think that's the direction that Greg Sankey is leading towards, whether he knows it or not. Now, Sankey also said yesterday, hey, his actions reflect the desire of his constituents, which are the ADs and, more importantly, the university presidents. But, man, I don't know, y'all. It would not be all that difficult to mess this up in a way that you can't go back and easily fix. It would not be difficult to do that. And I say that knowing full well, just to be completely transparent, pessimistic topics are not good podcasts. They don't make for good content. People like optimistic, more positive things. And things in which the tension is not likely to be resolved one way or another anytime soon, people also don't really like that either. This is not necessarily a winning topic for audience engagement, things like that, just to be totally transparent. We care about that kind of thing around here. This is not necessarily a super winning argument for, or a super engaging topic for audience engagement, but this is a very real thing that is going on. So therefore, it's something we feel like we sort of need to talk about. Let us see what else. Let me go back to DawgNation.com for a minute. Let's see what else. Bill Camacho doing that countdown as he enjoys doing. Let's see what else. Garrison Tucker mentioning he's going to become a video game nerd before he submits to ESPN being the only live sports provider. So I briefly alluded to this a little earlier. And I don't know if this is interesting to people or not, but we're about to have a major change coming to televised sports. It's just on the way. In a couple months, ESPN is going to start offering its service standalone. Previously, you had to be a subscriber to something to get ESPN. You could not buy just ESPN. ESPN was very closely tied to the cable model. But ESPN is losing subscribers at a huge rate because people are no longer subscribing to cable or a TV provider similar to that in the same way. And look, here's the thing. A lot of you are cord cutters. I'm not a cord cutter. I still kind of like my cable, but a lot of you are. And it sort of seemed like a smart thing to do. This is just one of those things that, like a lot of stuff we sort of talk about, I think people are going to regret doing this. I really do. I think the series of dominoes that are going to fall because of the collapse of the cable bundle, I don't think is going to be good for the consumer overall, especially if you're a sports fan. In the past, here was the thing about sports on TV. Sports on TV was subsidized largely by a bunch of people like your Aunt Gertrude who don't watch sports. But when her cable bill showed up, it wasn't itemized, so she wasn't realizing how much she was paying every month for an ESPN package of networks that she didn't watch. And those of us who do like sports, we were never having to pay full-on market value for ESPN because it was partially paid for by people who got cable but didn't watch sports. Well, as that model is starting to collapse, here's what we're going to discover. That sports on TV is going to be pretty expensive. What ESPN's going to offer is going to be $30 a month. But here's the thing, you compare say $11 a month or $15 a month for a Netflix or something like that. It's going to be at least twice as expensive. But here's the thing that I have a suspicion of, and I think I'm probably right, although I can't confirm it. Even at $30 a month, I don't think that's a break-even price for ESPN. I think that ESPN's offering that price as a loss leader to get people used to paying them directly. And I think to actually break even or profit on the huge rights fees they've paid out to all these sports leagues, I think they're going to have to charge a lot more than $30 a month. And some of y'all in the post sort of cable bundle collapse world, you'll do this thing where you'll subscribe to say YouTube TV during the football season, then you cancel when the football season's over. And you just sort of try to find a way to make this as cheap as possible. And I understand why you would. I don't think you're going to be able to do that anymore either. I mean, I think sports on TV is going to get a lot more expensive. And I just don't know how much people are willing to pay for it. I just don't know. Maybe they all will. I don't know. But one of the things that I believe that almost nobody else does, but I think is a possibility is I do think we could have a little bit of a TV rights bubble. You know what bubbles are? Real estate bubble. Sometimes you see stock market bubbles. We saw a tech bubble, right around the turn of the century. I think we could see a little bit of a rights fee bubble when it comes to especially college sports. Because the one thing we say all the time is any kind of right-thinking, smart approach to college athletics, the one thing you have to approach that with is the understanding that college athletics for the most part, especially college football, college athletics for the most part is unlike any other thing. That you can't kind of say, well, it's just going to be just like the NFL, or it's going to be just like this other professional sport, or it's going to be just like other amateur things that don't have the same monetary value. You can't try to make college athletics like something else because it sort of stands truly unique. So let's say that ESPN completely collapses. If that were to occur, that's obviously a huge issue for the college football playoff for the SEC, because right now they're the ones that's sort of founding the feast. But moving forward, it creates an even more difficult challenge. And I'll get back to comments after this. Moving forward, it creates an even more difficult challenge, which is when you look at the other major option that's out there, these are the streaming services. And the streaming services have exponentially more market cap. They are much more lucrative companies than these TV companies are. I mean, exponentially more so. But here's the problem. Look at the sports that are on the streamers right now. They all have one thing in common. NFL, NBA, even like wrestling more so than you realize. That, Raw is on Netflix now. Major League Baseball, MLS on Apple. Professional sports, unlike college sports, have international appeal. And Netflix, for instance, is a perfect example of this. Most of the streamers function in a similar way. They are not interested in sports that cannot be watched worldwide. And college football has zero international appeal. Now, there are like American expatriates that live in, like, say, other countries and things like that for work or what, armed services people. I'm not saying that there aren't people overseas that watch college football, but natives to these other countries are not interested in college sports. They're just not. College sports have zero international appeal. And so because of that, when you move into a world in which rights fees are going to be more dictated by what the streamers want to pay for, the streamers have shown you they're not that interested in paying for things that don't have mass international appeal. And that is, I believe, another one of these issues that college sports are going to have to deal with. But let's get back to your comments. Brandon Griffin writes in to say, call me naive, but I really believe that Kirby loves mentoring these kids and cares about their development. I don't see him leaving for the NFL. He's going to retire with Georgia when he finds someone he trusts to pass the torch to. Could very well be the case. I think the first part of what you say there really is true, is that Kirby really is the real deal when it comes to the value of coaching in the lives of players. I think he really believes that. I think he also understands the way in which that kind of thing is incentivized for the thing he also cares about, which is recruiting. That Kirby, his dad was a coach. He's been influenced by coaches. Therefore, I think he sees the value in coaching. But being bought into a positive impact in the life of his players as a coach, that also benefits him in recruiting. And so therefore, that behavior, which I do believe he earnestly believes is also incentivized, I think that's been a really good thing. And that's one of the reasons why I like coaches more so than agents. I want coaches to maintain their influence. I don't want to see that erode at the expense of more agents and more general managers, those types of things. I don't think that's good for the players overall if that's the case. You then say, and because of that, Kirby will never go to the NFL. Most Georgia fans believe that's true, and I'm sure you're probably right. For me personally, I could not say never on that. That's not something I would feel confident saying. Never, ever try his hand at the NFL. Kirby's young enough that he could do whatever he wants to do. I can't say that he would never do that. I think it's probably unlikely. I don't think it certainly happens anytime soon. I can't really say never on that, I don't think. Let me go to Facebook here just for a little bit. On Facebook. Let us see how people are doing over here today. Never do that. I think it's probably unlikely. I don't think it's really. By the way, speaking of folks living overseas, Greg Baker says they make it real hard for me to watch them dogs in Nicaragua. At least it's better than Afghanistan. I can only imagine you've probably got some stories to tell, Greg. And one of these days, we'd love to hear them from you about just all the ways that you've had to, in challenging places, find a way to watch UGA. That's really fascinating. Ken Holcomb says, I agree, BA. So far, every year, the playoff selection committee is shown to be incompetent. At least two undeserving teams make it, leaving the better teams out. Yeah, I mean, they are afraid to say Team A is just obviously better than Team B. Now, that doesn't mean, we see upsets happen all the time. You could have a surprising result. We're not saying that you couldn't. But what makes it a surprising result is so-and-so on paper is just obviously better. And, you see a lot of this because, look, the people that have the real influence on the committee are administrators. The administrators are informed by the sort of national media type reporters. There's a symbiotic relationship between those two entities, those two categories of people. And so we see a lot of similar thinking sometimes where the one thing about the SEC is, and Sankey in the clips we played in the full press conference talked a lot yesterday about strength of schedule. The fact that there's no real accounting for strength of schedule. But the reason why there isn't is because if there was, then you have to get into, well, this team is just probably a better team than that team. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that. So even if they said, okay, well, now, we've heard the criticism, we don't account for strength of schedule. Well, now we are going to account for strength of schedule. But what people don't realize is there are a lot of ways to also tabulate strength of schedule, and some of those are totally nonsensical. I'm not like a math nerd type person, but a strength of schedule based on a ratings metric such as like SP Plus or FPI or something like that is a lot more valuable strength of schedule than like the old school strength of schedule metric, which just simply looks at the win-loss record of the teams that you played or their win-loss record from a year ago. But that's pretty limited in terms of solid data because we don't really know what those teams had to play to get the records they got. Does that make sense? And so even if they did say, okay, well, we've heard the criticism, we don't count the strength of schedule, so now we're going to start accounting for strength of schedule. Mark my words, they wouldn't use real strength of schedule. They'd use Mickey Mouse strength of schedule that cares more about the records of the teams that you beat more so than the quality of the teams you played. It always comes back to they're just simply petrified of qualitative analysis. They don't believe in their own ability to sort of say this team is better than that team for all kinds of reasons, even though the SEC can show you strength of schedule, recruiting rankings, draft picks from the league, record head-to-head in these sort of non-conference games. The SEC has the data on its side, but it's the kind of thing that becomes easy to ignore for people who are kind of paid to ignore it. More on Facebook. Gary Holt says, you got an agent, you're married, aren't you? Oh, yeah. Listen, I have one agent, one person that sort of has ultimate veto power on any contract I would sign. That is indeed right, my lovely wife. You're right about that. Barry Watkins says he has YouTube TV. The only thing he doesn't have is ESPN Plus. I wonder how many dog games be on Plus only. So, Barry, it's interesting you bring that up because y'all know about a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago, I moved. Let me tell you what has happened since I moved, even though I still have the same cable provider. It used to be that for Georgia baseball games on SEC Network Plus, I'm curious if any of y'all know this, especially some of you who are younger than me. I'm sure you're more technologically savvy than I am. Some of you older than me probably are too. It used to be on my old provider, I could very easily watch SEC Network Plus just simply because I was a cable subscriber. I used the voice remote, could find Georgia baseball, watch all the games. Do you know that since I have moved, which was the entirety of this baseball season, I could not really watch those games on SEC Network Plus. Like that as kind of a free add-on to the cable I already had does not seem to exist. It's trying to push me towards ESPN Plus, which I'm also not a subscriber of. Don't really necessarily plan to be. What is that about? Why is that different? The best I can tell, the only thing that's changed is my address, but it does not work the way that it used to. I don't understand that. Let's see what else. Tyler Hull says that we got to go old school and start listening to the game on the radio, or BA could call the games on here. Listen, if I could, trust me, I would love to do that. A lot of anti-ESPN sentiment in Facebook here right now. Let's get a few more. I'll come back to Facebook here again in a minute. Garrison Tucker says, I'm just hoping that Major League Baseball stays with MLB TV. It's the only way here in Oklahoma City I can watch all the Braves games, even though I'm blacked out from Kansas City, Houston. Yeah, so it is mind-boggling how convoluted Major League Baseball's TV thing is, where if you are a Braves fan living in as you say, Oklahoma City, it's way easier to watch the Braves in Oklahoma City than it is in, like, say, Nashville or Danville, was it Danville, Virginia or somewhere like that? Although I guess maybe that's a Nationals town now. But a lot of these sort of places around the South that really are what you might think of as Braves country. I mean, it is sometimes just virtually impossible to either find the Braves or actually watch them because there's so many like local market blackouts with the streaming stuff. Whereas if you live somewhere else, it's probably a little easier. But if you wanted to, as you say, watch the Cardinals or something like that, you wouldn't be able to. The stuff with Major League Baseball on TV is just bizarre to me. Bizarre. We talked earlier about popularity of sports. I think that college football, as I mentioned, perhaps has a little bit of a grandiose image of how popular it could become. I do think that's true. I think that Major League Baseball is almost the opposite. I don't think Major League Baseball realizes how popular it is. Like, Major League Baseball is still a very big part of a lot of people's lives, but so help me, if Major League Baseball has their way, they're just going to run people off. Like, I mean, Major League Baseball, almost despite itself, is still incredibly popular. But I mean, they'll just find a way to mess it up, man. It is amazing to me. Amazing to me. Chef Jay Bowen says, what's crazy is the amount of Braves fans up here in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I see stuff about the Braves on signs at banks, on people's cars, and everything. So, Chef, I'll tell you this. And I guess there was some controversy the other day because the new owner of the Washington, now they're known as the Commanders, said that they're America's team now. And obviously in NFL, that's always been the Dallas Cowboys. When I was a little boy, the Braves, because of TBS, ran the imagery that they were America's team. And when I was a kid, because the Braves were terrible when I was a child, I used to always think that was a joke. Like, they just sort of said that to be funny. But when Atlanta got to be good and they had fans everywhere, you realize, man, they really are America's team. Like, or, something close to it. Like, the Braves really are among the most popular teams in all of Major League Baseball. And I don't think I properly appreciated that until now. I've kind of grown up and sort of seen all that around me. Like, the Braves have a huge region of support. Probably the Cardinals are probably the only region that comes close. I would say Boston's a little bit like that, smaller geography, but population-wise huge, where you just sort of pull from, a lot of border states. And this is one of the reasons why there are a lot of people who would love to put another major league team in the South, because right now the Braves print money on all these, kind of contiguous states. Braves just clean up with all these states. So whether it's like you hear more like Nashville now, but somewhere in the South, people would love to put another major league team because the Braves just eat down here in the South. But it is, it really is true that Atlanta is incredibly, incredibly popular. By the way, Oak Ridge, Tennessee is a place we've stayed plenty for, like, Georgia-Tennessee games. We got some stories to tell from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We've had fun in Oak Ridge before. Bo Molinari says, by the way, he's our resident Texas A&M fan in our comment section, says, I grew up in El Paso. We got KTLA, home of the Dodgers. Yeah, so we never got KTLA where I lived, but KTLA was a little bit like TBS, WGN, and WOR, in that some people did get KTLA as a little bit of a superstation. Not as much clearance as WGN. I think that TBS had the most clearance. I think that WGN had the second most. For a while as a kid, we also got WOR out of New York, which showed Mets games. And then some people did get KTLA. For instance, if you ever knew anybody back in the days when, like, satellite dishes were huge, like they were like huge, not like the little mini dishes that they, would come to be popular later on, but like really, really big dishes. If you had a dish, you definitely got KTLA. And then I guess a lot of people out west probably got that too. Boy, I bet growing up in El Paso must have been an interesting thing. I am fascinated by El Paso. Sun Bowl fascinates me. I'm interested in all of that. For I don't even know why. I'm interested in that. Jonathan Aaron says, do you think Georgia will ever do like Texas and have a dog network with all the sports and games? No, I think that everybody's pretty happy with how the SEC network is sort of working out here now. I think that's probably the case. Let's see what else. Let's go back to Facebook, see how people are doing there. Barry Watkins says Braves were America's team when they were on TBS. Yeah, they really were. I think I was a little bit older, though, when I fully appreciated just how true that was. Philip Jordan Wells, see, A, Philip knows his pop culture, but B, he does confirm that if you did have the satellite dish back in the old days, you could get KTLA. See, every now and then I get something right. Mike Tampadog says the problem with evaluators, he means of college football teams, they all have some sort of vested interest. Writers, talking heads, viewership, commissioners, he's everybody's bias. I think that's probably true. I do think that I don't think there's any such thing as true neutral objectivity. I'm not even sure that's necessarily all that valuable to begin with. I think that objectivity is probably to a degree overrated, that biases to a certain degree are natural. You might as well just sort of play the fade when it comes to something like that. I think that's probably the case. Here's what I don't want to be true, but I have to at least consider as a possibility. Maybe we were just really better before all of this stuff. You see, I mean, I think I've said this before. Like when I grew up as a child and like college football was like so important to me, I thought it was so strange that college football didn't have what I thought of as like a real national championship. And if you're not old enough to know, and I only have like memories of like the tail end of this era. Many of you grew up with this as sort of your primary era of college football. Like not only did we not have kind of a unanimously agreed upon national champion, we didn't oftentimes get that many good bowl games. That, you know, the bowl games, and I only have like a vague memory of this, but I do have some memory of it. Like they were all agreed to in like, say, backroom deals, and it wasn't based on competition of, well, we need to see this team play that team. There wasn't always a lot of that. A lot of this was oftentimes just sort of like, you know, smoke-filled rooms, backslapping, good old boy. Like that's what a lot of this sort of was back then. And that just seemed terrible to me. Like I wanted to see more good football games. I wanted to see, and oftentimes this didn't really involve Georgia back then. In my era growing up, Georgia wasn't very good. I mean, they were good. They just weren't like championship good. That's what I mean to say. So I wanted to see the best teams playing each other, and oftentimes you didn't get that. So when the BCS came, it seemed like an improvement because at least you're going to get a matchup between what was sort of consensusly thought to be the two best teams. And that, I would say, probably was better than the other system, at least at the time I thought it was. But I always wanted a true college football playoff. So when we got one in 2014, I was really happy. And I do think the college football playoff was an improvement over the other thing. I do. But when you see the way in which the move to 12, I don't think it's really satisfied anybody. It wasn't great for business. The ratings weren't outstanding. Everybody's angry. I think the emperor has been revealed to have no clothes. Maybe it was just better before all of that. That maybe some of these arguments that have defined college football, maybe they really are just unresolvable. I don't know. Paul Moon says, I used to love bowl season. I'd watch every single one. So here's where I'll kind of spin this back in a positive direction. I still think the games are really good. I really do. I think the bowl games are good. You don't really know who's playing. You know, there's 15 people in the stands, but the games are still fun. I mean, I'd give anything to watch a CarQuest Bowl right now, or a Quick Lanes Bowl right now. If that was on TV right now, I'd give anything to watch something like that. I think the games are still really good. That includes the regular season. I do think, though, that people use that to kind of justify their hubris of, well, the games are good, so therefore we can keep tinkering and we can keep messing and we can keep, influencing. Just because the games are good now doesn't mean it's always destined to be that way. Bo, by the way, says it wasn't better in the 80s and 90s. We just need to tweak it. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true, that a couple small tweaks might be enough to to sort of make this a little bit better. By the way, Marshall Fleming, now I do have memory of this. And some of this is because half the SEC was always in probation. But in my lifetime, you couldn't come close to watching every Georgia game on TV. Hard to imagine, but there were a lot of Georgia games that just were not on TV back then. And that is obviously not good. Lewis Sutherland says, with all the NIL deals, are players still allowed to opt out of bowls? Well, we don't 100% know for sure, but you can't help but notice there were not a ton of bowl opt-outs this past year. There were not very many. And I would say you have to assume that some of that is NIL contract related. I think that's the only conclusion you can draw, right? I think a lot of that's probably true. By the way, Garrison Tucker mentioning Acuna hitting a home run first at bat back, really first pitch. It's amazing. What a dramatic moment that was. And Baruch Dawg says, I think the college ball should go back to the bowl system, and after those games, pick the 4 best teams for a playoff. It would make the bowls count again. Yeah, I personally get the suspicion that the bowl system, and I don't want this to happen because I enjoy the bowl games, but we may see the bowls be on a little bit of life support. We may be seeing some of that. All right, anything else? Clayton Davis says the U.S. hockey team won the world championship the first time in 92 years. I did not know that. That's amazing. Gary Holt, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Did not know that. That's awesome. Philip Jordan Wells said the Forever Purge ruined El Paso for him, which is, I don't think I saw the Forever Purge. I've seen that little thumbnail pop up on the scroll for one of these streamers, but I don't believe I've ever watched the Forever Purge. All right, we got to go. By the way, Free Durden asked about the future of the Georgia-Florida game. So it's going to stay in Jacksonville, I believe. But as the league goes to and we've said this before, as the league goes to a 9-game schedule, it'll be interesting to see. Does that mean 4 home games, 4 road games plus the neutral, or is it going to be one of those sort of like 5-3-1, 3-5-1 type deals? That's interesting for both Georgia, Florida, and Oklahoma, Texas, 2 non-conference, I should say, conference neutral site games that I do believe are kind of here to stay for the long haul. We'll see about that. For now, though, thanks for being here as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. It's kind of coolish this morning, but we obviously know the summer's here. That means plenty of warm weather. So get your AC tuned up to factory fresh specs. Find our friends at R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. They'll keep you cool and comfortable all summer long. They'll give you the peace of mind you need. Getting some new life out of that old AC unit. Y'all have a great day. Back tomorrow for DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.